Saudi Arabia, Sands of Time is presented by Tariq Osman, and the producer is Neil McCarthy. Has the concept of development outlived its usefulness? That's a question explored on Analysis. It's coming up shortly. First, though, news of the return tomorrow morning of the Life Scientific.
You knew that place cells would tell us a lot more about the workings of the brain.
Yes.
Jim Al-Khalili finds out how our brains know where we are.
If you're going to, for example, shoot a basket, you look around, you see how far you are, and then you make a decision.
In conversation with the Nobel Prize-winning neuroscientist, John O'Keefe.
The brain was putting together information from lots and lots of different other brain areas, creating part of our perception and conception of space.
The Life Scientific returns tomorrow morning at 9, and then available on the BBC Radio 4 website.
Now on BBC Radio 4, it's time for Analysis. There are few issues more important than development, bringing billions of the world's neediest people out of poverty. But should we be thinking about the subject very differently? Here's Professor Nairi Woods.
Hello from Oxford. Tonight we have an audience of students and faculty from all over the world to hear and question some challenging ideas. They come from Professor Henrietta Moore, a distinguished anthropologist who heads the new Institute for Global Prosperity at University College London. Well, global prosperity is on the agenda, as later this year the international community will check whether it met the Millennium Development Goals set in 2000. And there'll be a set of new targets, the Sustainable Development Goals. But should we be talking about development at all? That's a question that Henrietta Moore will tackle in her lecture provocatively titled The End of Development. So now, over to Henrietta.
Surely, the need for development is an incontrovertible fact in the world we live in. 7 billion people live on this planet. 850 million of them are living in hunger. That's about 15% of the world population. More than 600 million people still do not have access to clean water. And 3 billion, not quite half, live on less than $2.5 a day. That's less than the cost of a cappuccino in central Oxford. So how could anyone be against development? What's wrong with me that I should want to make such an argument? My starting point is a simple one. We have had a 60-year experiment with development. This experiment began in the middle of the 20th century, when the world was a very different place. The idea then was that the developed North possessed the capital resources and technical skills which the poor South lacked. Consequently, technology, knowledge and finance should flow from North to South, from the developed to the developing world. The German philosopher and sociologist Max Weber, who died in 1924, before development as an idea had entered the world's consciousness, had something to say about the relationship of ideas to people's actions. He suggested that people's actions might be determined by many things, but that from time to time a great idea would come along and switch the train tracks of history. Development was just such an idea. But as we enter the second decade of the 21st century, is the idea of development still as powerful? Might it not be time to switch on to another track? And if so, what? 2 weeks ago, I was on my feet in the Kerio Valley in northern Kenya, walking through the fields with my research team, all of whom were born and live in the village which owns the fields. We were on the trail of the latest development project, set up by a well-meaning international non-governmental organisation, or NGO. The organisation's idea was a simple idea, a developmental idea. They would provide irrigation. Irrigation would lead to improved agriculture. Improved agriculture would lead to higher incomes. The aim of the whole intervention was to maximise agricultural output. This part of Kenya is a part of the world where a sharp appreciation of the larger political and economic structures shaping people's lives is often captured in people's nicknames. In the village where I work, there are few amenities in terms of roads, running water, sanitation, and electricity. And it's precisely for these reasons that people are often nicknamed Atomic America. One man I've interviewed many times is actually nicknamed World Bank. And when I ask him why, he usually laughs and says, "Because I am an economist, but I don't have any money." On that particular afternoon, we had gone in search of someone whose nickname is Biashara, business. You can think of him as Mr. Business. I was looking for him because on that particularly hot day, his field was one of the few under cultivation in this newly irrigated area. The others were lying dormant, untouched, since the maize harvest of the last year, some 4 to 5 months previously. Mr. Business is a man I admire. His field is laid out in neat rows of onions, tomatoes, beans, and watermelons. He wants farming to be a profitable business, despite the problems of markets when there are no good roads out of the valley. If hard labour and determination were all it took to succeed, then Mr. Business would really be in business. As I watched the sprinklers whirling the water into the hot air, I asked him what the main challenges were. "Loss of crops," he replied. Bringing large amounts of available water in the dry season of the year had attracted back into these cultivated fields birds, antelope, rodents, people's errant goats, but worst of all, injera, warthogs. Now, warthogs are bundles of fast-moving muscle with large tusks, and they are particularly fond of watermelon. Later, I asked others why they were not cultivating in February like Mr. Business. "We're waiting for rain," they replied. Much to the chagrin of the extension officer for the international NGO, who rushed about threatening sanctions against those not prepared to return to their fields to maximise their potential yields and keep producing something all the time. So why were people waiting for rain when they had an irrigation system? Now, the short answer to that is that the cultivation of maize is part of a complex ecology of livelihood activities. These half-hectare irrigated plots are not the only land people have to attend to. Sorghum and mangoes need attention at this time, but so too do other projects. Herding animals, building houses. People make money from a diverse and complex range of activities. November to January is also the season of marriages, ceremonies, and church events. Places and occasions where people come together to help and support each other. You will need those relationships you've built there and the access they provide to food, resources, and loans when the warthogs come for your watermelons. So maize has its place in the calendar of life, and that's why people are waiting for rain. They're waiting for the time when they should be planting maize. Now, what can we learn from this story? Well, perhaps 2 things. First, perhaps that technical fixes like irrigation systems are rarely the whole answer. This is something we have known for a very long time. It's been demonstrated over and over again in development projects. But we persist with the idea that technology will solve complex social problems. New technologies are important. They do, of course, bring genuine benefits. But what really solves complex social problems is not technological innovation, but social innovation. So technology matters, but when development projects succeed, they succeed because of the intricacies of social innovation. And when they fail because of the intricacies of specific situations and locations. Now, the second thing we might learn is that economic maximization of outputs and incomes, growth, have their limits as a model for social and economic progress. There's no doubt that better roads in the valley would improve access to markets and increase incomes for people like Mr. Business. But as the raison d'etre behind development and progress for the global south as a whole, indeed for the planet as a whole, there are serious reasons to doubt this. Infinite growth on a finite planet is not an option. Let's take a very simple example. Water scarcity affects every continent on the planet. And by 2050, more than 54 countries in the world will be water short. Water scarcity affects agricultural and industrial production, as well as health and well-being. Water usage globally has been growing at approximately twice the rate of population growth. Infinite growth is not possible in a water-short world. There will be no warthogs, or there will be warthogs, but there will be no watermelons. The future of human populations cannot be based on continuing to try and maximize growth. And yet conventional economic growth, driven by escalating consumption of resources, remains a primary goal of government policy all around the world. The current model of development, the one we have lived with for 60 years, depends on growth. Depends on growth to bring people out of poverty. But what if the success of growth is part of our history, but cannot and will not play the same role in our future? What then does a model of development based on progress understood as economic growth look like? Do we still want to hold to this idea that the global south follows the global north? Well, actually, evidence from the global south suggests otherwise. In central West Brazil, where many live on soybeans and maize, farming consists mostly of monocultures. In 2013, the region farmed a record volume of soybeans and maize, over 78 million tons. But most of it was not used to feed the population, but exported to produce biofuels. Now, it's precisely in response to the kinds of problems caused by agribusiness of this nature, which include, of course, the contamination of natural resources, increasing local food prices, health problems, soil degradation, that many communities in Latin America and the Caribbean have transitioned to agroecology, combining the very best science, the best of traditional agriculture, and social equity and access to land. Agroecology now involves about 500 million people worldwide. And independent research studies have shown that it can produce as much or more than input-dependent industrial farming. In Ecuador, agroecological farming increased from 23,000 hectares in 1996 to around 403,000 in 2008, generating nearly $4 million in returns and creating 172,000 jobs. A major study of 286 projects in 57 countries found that on average crop yields increased by 79% as a result of turning to agroecological methods. The simple proposition is that farms should mimic the functioning